11:41 p.m. He couldn't sleep. Fischer opened his eyes and looked around the cabin of Deutsch's private plane. Strange to be sitting in an armchair in an airplane, he thought. Strange to be sitting in an airplane at all. He'd never flown in his life. Fischer reached for the coffee pot and poured himself another cupful. He rubbed a hand across his eyes and picked up one of the magazines lying on the coffee table in front of him. It was one of Deutsch's. What else? He thought. After a while, his eyes went out of focus, and the words on the page began to blur together. Going back, he thought. The only one of 9 people still walking around, and he was going back for more. They'd found him lying on the front porch of the house that morning in September 1940, naked, curled up like a fetus, shivering and staring into space. When they'd put him on a stretcher, he'd begun to scream and vomit blood, his muscles knotting, rock-like. He'd lain in a coma 3 months in the Caribou Falls hospital. When he'd opened his eyes, he'd looked like a haggard man of 30, a month short of his 16th birthday. Now he was 45, a lean, gray-haired man with dark eyes, his expression one of hard, suspicious readiness. Fischer straightened in the chair. Never mind, it's time, he thought. He wasn't 15 anymore, wasn't naive or gullible, wasn't the credulous prey he'd been in 1940. Things would be different this time. He'd never dreamed in his wildest fancies that he'd be given a second chance at the house. After his mother had died, he traveled to the West Coast, probably, he later realized, to get as far away as possible from Maine. He'd committed clumsy fraud in Los Angeles and San Francisco, deliberately alienating spiritualists and scientists alike in order to be free of them. He'd barely existed for 30 years, washing dishes, doing farm work, selling door-to-door, janitoring, anything to earn money without using his mind. Yet somehow, he'd protected his ability and nurtured it. It was still there, maybe not as spectacular as it had been when he was 15, but very much intact, and backed now by the thoughtful caution of a man rather than the suicidal arrogance of a teenager. He was ready to shake loose the dormant psychic muscles, exercise and strengthen them, use them once more against that pest hole up in Maine, against Hell House. Hello and welcome, or welcome back, as the case may be, to the Atlantean Archive. I hope wherever you are that you're doing well. Whatever's going on in your life is going well for you today. Hope you had a good Thanksgiving. I know we did here. We just spent a quiet, relaxed day with the family. That works out great for us. You know, it's fun to have extended family and friends over for the holidays, but sometimes you just want to have a more relaxed time with your immediate family. So that's what we did. The cool weather is back, which is very good for me. I'm a cool weather kind of guy. Fall is my favorite season of the year by far, so I'm all about that. And there's something special, or always has been for me, about this time of year between Thanksgiving and Christmas. There's just something I really love about that. So things are going well here for us, and I hope they're going well for you wherever you are. Today, I wanted to talk to you about the novel Hell House by Richard Matheson, who is one of the most prolific and influential writers in the horror and science fiction genres in the 20th century. If you're a GenXer like me or a boomer, you probably grew up with his material. If you're watching a channel like this and you like retro stuff in general, you're almost certainly familiar with his material, even if you don't recognize his name. Matheson was just all over the place in those days. He was writing for television programs like The Twilight Zone. Some of the best episodes of The Twilight Zone were based on his material. Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, you know, the one with William Shatner and the thing on the outside of the plane, that was Matheson's story. He also did Little Girl Lost, Death Ship, Third from the Sun, and some others. In the 1980s, they adapted one of his short stories called Button Button. Matheson didn't think too much of that adaptation. The acting wasn't very good, and they changed his ending, which authors always hate. He was known for the teleplays he wrote for programs like The Night Stalker, The Night Strangler. He worked with Dan Curtis on the Jack Palance Dracula project, which is quite good. If you've never seen it, it's a solid adaptation, I think, even though they did change some things. That was really the first adaptation of Dracula where they put a romance angle in. They tried to make him as something a little bit more than a monster. At least, as far as I know, that's the first one where they did that. But I think it came off rather well. Matheson was involved in these and many other projects. Trilogy of Terror is what many people will remember him most for, especially the third episode called Amelia, where you've got Karen Black being chased around her apartment by the Zuni doll. He and Dan Curtis followed that up a couple years later with Dead of Night. 1977. That's another anthology, and it's mostly been forgotten, which is unfortunate because the third episode, again, is the best one, and it's really great. It's called Bobby. If you haven't seen that one, check it out. You can find it on YouTube. Tubi has Dead of Night right now for free streaming. It's really excellent. It was one of the few things I watched when I was a kid that actually scared me. I watched a lot of sci-fi and horror back then. Not much of it ever actually scared me. The 1979 Salem's Lot miniseries was one of the few things that did, and this was another one. Bobby was absolutely great and still creepy to this day. So if you haven't seen it, definitely check that out. If you love TV, movies, and horror from that time, that sort of thing, that should be right up your alley. But Matheson was also well known for a number of his short stories and his novels. I Am Legend is the one he's most famous for. That's been adapted 3 times. Vincent Price was the first adaptation. The Last Man on Earth is what that one was called. That's mostly faithful to the story, and I thought really rather well done. Then you had the Omega Man with Charlton Heston in the 70s, and that's got to be seen to be believed. It's rather it's just weird. I don't really know how else to say that. If you just want to weird yourself out, watch that one. And of course, we had the movie with Will Smith a few years ago, which is mostly forgettable and has little in common with Matheson's story other than the title. But he's done so many other things. What Dreams May Come, Bid Time Return, which is adapted as Somewhere in Time with Christopher Reeve and Jane Seymour. A Stir of Echoes, The Shrinking Man, so many things. And then this story we're going to talk about today, Hell House, was adapted as The Legend of Hell House. The novel itself was published in 1970. The Legend of Hell House, the film, which Matheson wrote the screenplay for, came out in 1973. Some of you may have seen that. If you haven't, it's worth it. It's a solid horror film. It's not... It's mostly forgotten today. I think that's kind of unfortunate because I think they actually did a really good job with that. That starred, let's see if I can remember, Roddy McDowall and Pamela Franklin. Gail Honeycutt is in that, and I'm trying to remember the guy, but Clive Revel was the other actor in that movie. So really good. If you haven't had a chance to see that, it's a solid movie. I would recommend it. So we'll get into discussing this novel, and if you haven't read Matheson, do check him out. His material is very easily available in Kindle and paperback. It's all out there, and you can easily find lists of his best material. I would start with I Am Legend. That's, I think, easily his best novel. And not a very long read either. It's a novella, so but not very long read. I'll probably do a review on that at some point in the future. So let's go ahead and get into this. Let's get into Hell House. Now, I'll start off with just doing a basic synopsis for you, basic plot synopsis, character synopsis, not very much in the way of spoilery material, really light on that, just the kind of thing you would ordinarily get in a review or read on an Amazon review or whatever. And then we'll go a little bit beyond that. I'll give you warning before I do, though, and we'll get into a little bit more character analysis having to do with a point of controversy that's arisen regarding the novel in some of the reviews I've seen. So some of you may find that interesting, but we'll go ahead and get into this here. Hell House is remarkable. It's on a couple of levels. It's considered, as I said, one of the best haunting novels out there. A couple other notable ones, the Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, The House Next Door by Ann Rivers Siddons. Hell House has more sheer horror material in it than you will find in either of those other 2 books, though there are more horrific moments and more, I think, atmosphere in this one. If you're just looking for straight up horror, those books are slow burns. The other 2, they're slow burns, they're more atmospheric. If you want more of a horror punch in the nose, Hell House is the way to go for that, although it has its atmosphere as well. It's a rather quick read. Richard Matheson had what you could call a pared down writing style. A lot of his dialogue was kind of clipped. Some authors try to do that, and it doesn't work very well at all. But Matheson was one of the authors who could really do that well. The story just moves along. He doesn't get bogged down in a lot of extraneous information or detail. You know, he's not Lucy Maud Montgomery, so you're not going to get 2 pages describing Grandma's living room, anything like that. The characters in this story are good, believable, solid, realistic type characters. Unfortunately, in horror, a lot of times you get 2-dimensional characters, or you get a number of people who are basically just different versions of the same personality type or whatever. That's not the case at all in Hell House. Matheson gives the four main characters who carry the weight of the story, he gives them very individual personalities, very believable personalities. They're notable for the fact that all of them have one or more distinct things about their character, about their personality, that Matheson is able to weave the story around. And what's also notable about this is you don't have one particular character who is the main character or the lead in the story. The story is spread out, the plot is spread out between all four characters, and they all carry the weight of the story. So that's something that I think really recommends this story, just how well spread out that is. They all have something to do, and it all makes sense in its context. There are some creepy scenes, as I mentioned, and there are some real punch in the nose type scenes, and as far as the horror content goes. One of the things that you should know about that, just depending on what kind of thing you like to read, there is violence in this story, and it is usually of a sexual nature. There are sexual assaults in this book. Now, it's going to be a turnoff for some people. You're not going to want to read anything like that. I understand that. I have a pretty empathic personality, so I really get into characters. I really identify with characters and situations. I like to get in and really immerse myself in what's going on, and that kind of thing is very difficult for me to read, and a lot of times I skip over it. So you may want to do the same thing here. Other people, they've got no problem at all with that, but I wanted to tell you up front that that is in here. There are several scenes of sexual assault in this book. So just want to say up front that that material is in here. It has led to some controversy, and I'll get into that when I do more of my deep dive section on the video. But I'll give you a warning before that comes up. Another aspect of this book that I think really recommends it is that it has a solid ending. This is not one of those books where you spend a couple hundred pages and then it's like the author doesn't know what else to do, so they just take a meat cleaver and they just chop the thing off in the end, and you're left with all sorts of loose threads, stuff that never gets tied up, questions that never get answered, that sort of thing. No, in Hell House, you get an answer. You get definitive answers. As a matter of fact, everything is tied up, and there are really no more questions of consequence by the end of the book. So that's something that's kind of unusual. It's not open-ended at all. It's not ambiguous like a lot of horror novels are. You don't get a meandering plot that runs all over the place and then ends up going nowhere, as some people complain about the works of Stephen King. Stephen King, by the way, has cited Richard Matheson as having been a major influence on his work. Also, George Romero was another one. Steven Spielberg worked with him and loved working with him. He ranked him up there with Isaac Asimov and Ray Bradbury as a master of the genre. So he was very influential on people who, in turn, have made huge impacts on these genres in science fiction and horror. Another aspect let's see, what else should I bring out about this that you should know before getting into it? I think it's just, the scientific aspect. That's one thing I wanted to get into. This book is unusual in that there is a strong scientific element in the approach to haunting. You don't get that very often in these stories. It's just straight up ghosts running around scaring people, or somebody who's trying to fool people with supernatural trappings or whatever. In this story, you get a scientific approach to the issue of hauntings, to the paranormal, to the supernatural. What are we dealing with here? Can we break it down and look at it from a scientific aspect? And that's something that recurs in Richard Matheson's works. In I Am Legend, for instance, you've got Robert Neville, the protagonist in that story, examining vampirism from a scientific aspect. Why does a stake through the heart kill a vampire? What's up with sunlight? Why are they allergic to garlic? These elements. He tries to experiment with these things and get some scientific answers. So you go beyond just the folklore, the legend, the supernatural sugarcoating that you get in so many of these stories. You get a science aspect to it, which brings some unique elements to the story, and that also factors into how the story wraps up, and I think is one of the things that makes this a more satisfying hauntings type story. So that would recommend itself, I think, as well. Getting into a bit of the plot synopsis here, basically the story is this. You have a millionaire by the name of William Deutsch who is dying of cancer. He's on his deathbed, and like a lot of people who are in that position, he's curious. Do humans really have a soul or a spirit that survives death? What is the truth about paranormal phenomena? Is there an afterlife? All of these kinds of things. Deutsch has been investigating these issues for years. He has been looking at haunted houses and this sort of thing. He has discovered that most psychics and mediums he's come across are frauds, but there are some real ones out there, in his opinion. And there's one place left in the world that he knows of, one haunted type house where survival beyond death has never been debunked, where paranormal phenomena have never been exposed as a hoax or a misunderstanding or what have you. And that's the Belasco house in Maine. In an isolated place in Maine. It's a mansion. It's also known as Hell House, and it's referred to in parapsychological research circles as the Mount Everest of haunted houses. There have been 2 expeditions to this house over the years. Both ended in absolute disaster. Everyone is dead with the exception of one person who also happens to be a character in this novel. And we'll get into that in a minute here. Now, Deutsch, wanting answers to the question of whether there is an afterlife or not, since he is about to find out personally, wants to know what he's in for, he has assembled a team to travel to the Belasco house, to Hell House, and to spend some time getting him some definitive answers. The first member of that team is the scientist. His name is Lionel Barrett. He is unique, almost unique in his field, because he is one of the few scientists who accept the reality of the paranormal, who believes that parapsychological research is a valid area of scientific inquiry. As a matter of fact, he believes he knows what's going on. He thinks that he has solved the paranormal. He understands it. He is also of the opinion that there are legitimate psychics and mediums out there, people who are able to tap in to the paranormal, into psychic phenomena, into psychic energies and that sort of thing. And part of what is driving him in this story, what drives his character, is that he is wanting to demonstrate to his scientific colleagues that this is a valid area of research, that this phenomena is real, and that they need to acknowledge this and they need to do more research on it. He has invented a machine that he thinks is going to assist him in proving his case and proving his hypothesis. And he's brought in by Deutsch, who is offering him $100,000 to spend a week in the house. And that's all the time Deutsch is going to give him. He said he wants an answer within a week. He tells him, look, I'll take an answer either way, yes or no, as long as it's definitive. And you have 1 week to give me that answer. And this kind of throws Barrett off. He's like, 1 week to give you an answer to one of the questions that has puzzled mankind throughout all recorded history. Is there an afterlife? Is there a soul? Do we survive beyond the death of the body? You want an answer in a week. But, this is the only chance he's probably ever going to get to do this. So he jumps for it. He thinks he can give Deutsch a definitive answer, as a matter of fact. He thinks he has figured it out, as I mentioned. So he jumps at the chance. This is also a chance to use the money to provide for his retirement for himself and his wife. Another character that factors into the story is Barrett's wife. Her name is Edith. She is not a scientist, not a medium or psychic or a researcher in this, but she wants to go along to assist him in his research. Edith is an interesting character. She had something of an abusive childhood. She has a lot of repression in her life that factors into this story, that becomes part of the plot as the story develops. Edith has a lot of sexual repression issues. One of the things I didn't mention about her husband, Lionel, he had polio when he's a child. He's partially disabled. He's almost impotent. So this is an issue in their marriage. And because of the way that she was raised, Edith has a lot of sexual frustration in her life. And then again, that aspect of her marriage with her husband. And this becomes part of the plot. Edith is also extremely insecure. She has a lot of her security in her relationship with her husband. They were separated one time years ago when he went to do some research on a project. And she has never told him this, but she was so freaked out by being by herself at that time that she almost committed suicide. So she's determined to go with him, and he doesn't want her to go. He thinks the house is a dangerous environment, that it literally could harm her, but she's absolutely insistent. She's going to go. She will brave Hell House just to be with him. The third character that factors in, the third one that one of the ones that Deutsch brings in directly and gives his $100,000 offer to, is a mental medium by the name of Florence Tanner. Florence is a former actress. She's a beautiful woman. And as of the time of this story, she is the pastor of a spiritualist congregation where she holds seances. She does mediumship. She contacts the other side. She has this guide spirit, this American Indian she calls Red Cloud, I think it is. And she channels this spirit. She is on the opposite side of the spectrum from Barrett. They both believe in the paranormal. They both believe that supernatural phenomena are legitimate. But where Barrett takes the scientific approach in thinking that there's a natural answer for these phenomena, Florence takes the other approach. She's a wholehearted believer in the soul, in the spirit, in existence beyond death, in communication with spirits and all of that. And she's being brought into this because Deutsch wants that aspect of things investigated. She is, as I said, a mental medium in that she does channeling, and she's the kind of medium that will vibe in on things and environments and tell you, oh, there was a murder in this place 20 years ago or something like that. The fourth and final member of the group, another one that Deutsch is bringing in directly, is Benjamin Franklin Fischer. Fischer is a physical medium. He's the kind of medium who manifests physical phenomena like ectoplasm, levitates tables, causes things to move around the room, that sort of thing. Fischer is remarkable for a couple of reasons. When he was a teenager, he was traveling around with his mother doing readings in various places, and he was reported to be, at that time, the most powerful physical medium that anyone had ever seen. He was able to manifest things that no one else had ever been able to, and he was not debunked. He was the real deal. Barrett himself, the scientist in the expedition, knows that Fischer at least was at one time the real deal. Now, at the very beginning of the review, I read a part of the novel where Fischer is traveling to Belasco House, to Hell House, and he's reflecting on his life. He was part of one of the expeditions to Hell House. There were two, and everybody ended up dead except for him, and he was found in the condition that I read at the beginning of the video. He was found naked, curled up in a fetal position, and half insane at the end of that time. And afterwards, he wanted nothing to do with parapsychological research anymore. He wanted people to leave him alone. So he deliberately perpetrated fraud so that people would dismiss him and he could just live his life in obscurity and forget everything. But after all these years, Deutsch has sought him out and brought him in and lured him with this promise of $100,000 and said, go into the house and tell me what you can find. He is also the group's expert on Belasco House, on Hell House. He knows the background, having been there before. He's done the research into the guy who built the place, Emmerich Belasco, the one for whom the house is named. And that's something important to understand about this as well. Why is Hell House a haunted house? Why has it got this reputation? Well, it's because Emmerich Belasco, whom his mother referred to as Evil Emmerich, and gives you an idea of his character, created this place for the express purpose of investigating evil in basically every form that you can imagine, and many of you probably wouldn't. He was a millionaire. He brought in guests from all over the world, and they conducted orgies. They did everything, engaged in every form of debauchery and cruelty that you can imagine. And it got worse and worse and worse as the years went on. He just brought these people in. He would support them. He had servants who would go out and buy food from the surrounding communities and bring them to this remote location. So basically, his guests didn't have to provide anything for themselves. They could just engage in what he called his symposiums, where they would get together and they would have orgies and do all that kind of stuff. Over the years, as Fischer explains to the group at one point in the story, Belasco himself began to step back from this group. He began to just influence. He began to experiment. Belasco, in addition to being a vile type of individual, was a mental giant. He was a genius. He had a powerful intellect, and he applied that intellect to the destruction of human beings through various types of debauchery. So you've got all of that going on in this house over an extended period of time into, I believe it was like 1922 or something like that. And then Some people from the surrounding communities went to the house because the families of guests were complaining that they hadn't heard from their relatives in a long time. They had to break into the house and they found everybody there dead. Belasco himself was never found. As Fischer tells the group, toward the end, people just stopped taking care of themselves. They stopped bathing, they stopped washing their clothes, they stopped going out for food, bringing food into the house. The furnace goes out and they can't even get themselves they can't get enough together to even just go and relight the furnace, so they start to freeze. All of these things happen, and these people just basically waste away and die. And then Belasco himself is never accounted for. So the house, as Barrett thinks of it, is just permeated, saturated with this horrible, evil, dark energy. Florence takes a different approach to it. Again, she believes that spiritual phenomena are real in the sense of surviving personality. She thinks that this house is full of the spirits of people who were tormented by all of the things that they engaged in, and probably tormented by Belasco himself. So, as the story develops, and the four people go to Hell House, which, by the way, Deutsch has bought. He's so intent on an answer, he's not only willing to take these people, fly them there, pay them this enormous amount of money to investigate for him. He just went out and bought the house, just flat out bought it. And he's had electricity wired up to the house with a generator. He's had phone service installed. He wants a definitive answer, and he's got the money to back up the research. So that's the setting. That's the basic plot. That's the basic character breakdown of the individuals who go into Hell House for the week to conduct this research. Now, as the story develops, the power in the house, which is a very real thing, begins to work on each one of them through their weaknesses. Their personal weaknesses, their weaknesses in their relationships with one another. Barrett is a very stubborn guy. He's got that scientific approach. He's kind of condescending to Florence, especially because he considers her views quaint. Edith, with her insecurities, becomes an issue with that. Florence is basically, over the course of the book, and I guess this is getting into a little more spoilery stuff right now, Florence is systematically destroyed by the house. She goes in, just completely opened up, all her psychic shields down. She's trying to engage. She is an intelligent woman, but she's also very kind-hearted in a kind of naive way. She is so sold on her interpretations of spiritualism and supernatural phenomena, so confident that she knows what's really going on, and that this house is full of tortured souls that she wants to reach out to and help to get free from its influence, to get free from Belasco's influence and the prison that she thinks this house has become for them, that she just opens herself up, and the house just goes through her like a buzzsaw, basically. Fischer, Benjamin Fischer, Florence and Fischer, I'm getting kind of tongue-tied with that. Fischer, on the other hand, he knows what the house can do. He's been through it once before, and he is determined to get out of this week alive and collect his $100,000. So he goes in with the psychic shields up, in contrast to Florence. He's trying to stay back from everything. He doesn't want to do any readings. He doesn't want to engage, and that becomes another aspect of tension in this group dynamic that you've got here. So again, as the story develops, all four characters carry the weight of the plot. It does tend to center a little bit more on Florence at times. Florence, in my opinion, is the most likable character. I really enjoyed her character, but I think that, again, Matheson did a credible job with all of these characters. So for the second part of the review here, I want to get into a little bit more of a deeper dive with regard to the characters, specifically for the purpose of addressing some controversy that has come up with regard to this novel, and that in turn has to do with the episodes of sexual violence in the story. I have seen some reviewers who have suggested that Matheson might be sexualizing the women in the story because the women are the source of the sexual assaults. So I wanted to get into that and just address that a little bit. Why aren't the men involved in this? Why aren't the men instigating this sort of thing? Why is it just the women? Well, first of all, when you go back and look at what I was talking about, the characters earlier, Dr. Barrett is partially disabled due to polio and almost completely impotent. So he doesn't have a whole lot of sexual feeling at all. So, there's not much room there with regard to his character for that kind of aggression to come from him. He's just not capable of it. Edith, on the other hand, his wife, she has that repression, not just because of the issue with her husband and his physical disabilities, but also because of the way she was raised. She was taught that sex was a very dirty thing. She has convinced herself that she really doesn't have much interest or desire in her life for that sort of thing, even in her relationship with her husband. But she kind of feels ashamed of that and conflicted. So the power in the house, again, is going out at these characters, trying to divide them from one another using that divide and conquer type strategy. It's trying to destroy them internally, mentally, emotionally, at times physically. So this is a major point of weakness for Edith, for her character. So the house goes after her. In a way, it makes sense for the house to go after her, since this is a weakness in her life. Florence, again, as I mentioned, is a beautiful woman. She's a former actress. She's very attractive, and the house goes after her physically. It tries to assault her physically and does some pretty horrific things to her body over the course of the story. As I mentioned before, a lot of this story has to do with the gradual destruction of Florence Tanner, her character, which can be a difficult thing to read at times because her character is so likable. She's not a weak-willed woman by any means. She's a strong-willed woman. She's assertive. She's intelligent. So, she's not mousy and dumb or easily led or anything like that. She's a well-fleshed-out character. And the house just attacks her on that basis. It goes after her body because she is attractive, but it also goes after her mind. It goes after her emotions. As I mentioned before, she is a very compassionate person. She believes that the haunting in this house has to do with the tortured souls that are present there, at least in her belief, that are present there. And she's trying to help these people. So she's opening up, she's reaching out. And the house, again, is hitting her like a buzzsaw, hitting her not only physically, but mentally and emotionally. And the sexual aspect of the assaults on her, and that she is later used to perpetrate against other members of the team, makes sense in regard to that. Fischer, the other male character, he goes into the house, as I mentioned, with his psychic shields up. So the house is not able to get at him as much. That changes toward the end of the story when he finally does open up. But you can understand, based on that, how the house would affect him probably least of all, because he is actively shielding himself against its influence. So that is, first of all, the reason why I think the two male characters are not used as to perpetrate the sexual incidents, the incidents of sexual violence in the story, why it focuses more on the women, and why it makes sense when you consider their character. It also makes sense when you consider the nature of the power in the house, when you consider Belasco himself and what Fischer has to say about what sort of person he was and what went on in the house. Emmerich Belasco delighted in the destruction of women, in their sexual destruction, in their mental destruction. He enjoyed dominating and destroying them. He made his own sister into his mistress and then destroyed her psychologically by dumping her. She ended up dying in the house of a drug overdose as a direct result of that. So the power in the house, in association with Belasco, with his personality, is specifically geared toward the destruction of women, physically, mentally, and emotionally. So there you have two reasons why I don't think that Matheson is engaging in sexual exploitation of his female characters. The characters themselves lend themselves to what happens in the story, as opposed to the male characters, and also the nature of the power in the house is more directed toward women than it is toward the men, although the men are also caught up in this in their own way in the story. Matheson is not Richard Lamond, let's put it that way. There is a great difference in their writing styles and their approach to character. In a Richard Lamond story, he's barely capable of having a female walk into the room without the men in the room undressing her, or without the narrator undressing her, for that matter. Matheson does not do that. The sexual encounters and attacks in the novel, while they are uncomfortable, they actually do fit with the plot and the nature of the power in the house. So those things make sense. So I did want to address that and get into a little bit more of a deeper dive on that issue, just in response to some of the reviews I've seen. Anyway, that is my take on Hell House and what Richard Matheson is doing here and why I think that it's worth reading. So let me know what you think in the comments. Those of you who have read it, let me know what you think. If you've seen the movie, let me know what you think of that too. I think the movie did a really good job of portraying or of adapting the novel. And of course, that's due to the fact that Matheson himself then maybe you just want to watch the movie because you get the best of it without getting those elements. So let me know what you think. And in the meantime, thank you for stopping by. Thank you for subscribing to the channel. Those of you who have, if you do like this video, do give it a like, leave me a comment, share it, subscribe. Again, that all of those things make the channel more visible and help it to grow with the almighty YouTube algorithm there. So thank you again for stopping by and for taking the time to watch this review. Leave me your comments on it. And until next time, take care and God bless.